I'm going to share a new idea with you. Some of you know my ideas about how to make get your ideas adopted. But I thought this would be the perfect forum to share a new idea, which is some stuff about change. And I decided that, and what's been bothering me recently is I see a lot of people who see an urgent need for change. There's a lot of problems in the world where we need change. And I hear increasing numbers of voices saying, well, maybe democratic change isn't adequate for the crises facing us, whether that's climate change or terrorism or whatever. Maybe there's no alternative. Maybe we need to look at authoritarian models. Look at China. How do they move so fast? Personally, I don't like that idea. It may be true. They may be right. I don't like the idea. My grandfather told me years ago about what it was like in the 30s, in the lead up to the Second World War and the rise of Hitler. I don't like that thought. And it became clear to me that actually, I've spent my life in innovation and creativity. And actually, innovation is defined as the implementation of ideas. It's actually about change. And I started to think, well, what happens if you start thinking about change from a perspective of innovation and creativity? And I've just found that a really intriguing thought, because it's, as I say, it's something I've long been interested in, and I thought I'd like to share it with you and get your ideas and see how it goes. So a little bit of background about me. I started my career in engineering. I'm used to a very male-dominated world. When I was at school, I spent my final term at a public school where my dad taught, and there was me, and there was 864 public school boys. I've been in the co-ed school before that, Quaker school, and public school boys are very weird. I worked at an engineering company in Newcastle, and at one point there was me and 3,000 blokes in the works. They were sweet, actually, but there were some very puzzled and quite incorrect views about why I was there. And what that, I think, has given me is probably a sort of lifelong curiosity about the balance between individuality and conformity. Because actually innovation needs both. You both need the courage, as Sarah so wonderfully exemplifies, to stand up and say, yeah, you may think this is nuts, but I want to row around the world. I'm putting words into Sarah's mouth here, not mine. But equally, if you are just a maverick, the loner in the shed, you will never get anywhere. So you need to somehow balance both. So that's where I come from. I've always been interested in creativity. I'm concerned about change. And when you think about creativity, I mean, it's fascinating. The amount of stuff that's happening that we don't actually notice. So we ignore. There's really, really big fundamental trends happening, which we ignore. I mean, women going out to work. I dug out these figures a few weeks ago. This is what's happened during my mum's lifetime. She's now 90. I think it was 23% women at work, and many of those were in domestic service before the First World War. Big bump during the First World War. Look at that change that happened during the Second World War. It went up to about 85 to 90% women were at work. Dropped down afterwards. Confess, I kind of guessed that figure because I couldn't quite find the data. And then it's been very steadily rising ever since there. We kind of think it's sort of normal, and you look at that and you go, wow. It wasn't that we were being forced out to work. If somebody here had said, you've all got to go out to work, there'd have been a riot. We'd have, what about the kids? If somebody here says, you can't go out to work, you've got to stay at home and do the washing, look after the kids, there'd be a riot. But somehow all these enormous trends happen. They happen very quietly, and we completely ignore them. You've also got disruptive, what's in the jargon's called disruptive innovations. And these are these ones that sneak out at you. And you suddenly say, where did that come from? That wasn't there. This is the inside of a digital camera. Interestingly, you know, Kodak, there was a guy at Kodak called Steve Sasson, who in 1975 invented and patented digital photography for Kodak. He tried really hard to persuade Kodak that this was going to be important and they ought to do something about the forthcoming rise of digital photography. And they said, oh, no, analog film, it's far better, it's more stable, better color balance, better grain size. This digital stuff, it's rubbish, which was true. After a bit, he gave up. In 2000, I saw some figures from Kodak which were projecting, yes, there is a steady rise in digital photography. And in fact, actually, I have those here. So this is the sort of data that Kodak were looking at in 2000. Okay, what you've got here is digital and analog. And I think if I was the board of Kodak, it'd be very tempting to look at that and say, yeah, well, this funny upstart, it's coming up. But actually what it's doing is boosting interest in photography in general, and our business is doing great. No problem, gov. 2003, they looked at the figures and they were a bit different. They started getting worried. Well, I should say also at this time here, what they were projecting was that by 2015, digital might be about 30% of analog. By 2015, 4 years' time, still 2/3 photographic film. 2003, I think they probably said something pretty unprintable. 2005, they closed down their factories or sold them that were making analog film and analog cameras. 18 months after this, they actually got out of their mainstream business. And I don't actually have the data worldwide, but for UK camera sales, between 2003 and 2006, well, by 2006, the official industry figures didn't even bother to count analog film. I think it's still used in X-rays, by the way. And a few art photographers like it. So there is some, but it's not worth counting. That's a disruptive innovation. Comes out of the blue. You're so busy focused on your mainstream business or the things you're paying attention to, you just don't see this stuff happening. And what I find really fun from the point of view of somebody who likes innovation, creativity, change, wow, isn't that exciting? And a lot of those of us who are in this sort of bubble of the world of innovation and creativity have that sort of buzz. Oh, it's change. Oh, great, that's going to be fun. Some people, but I mean, we have to be aware that actually outside our little bubble, attitudes to change are much more problematic. People are afraid of it. With reason. I mean, for example, there are these looming crises that it becomes very apparent that our leaders don't know how to solve. We've got climate change. We've got terrorism. We've got economic collapses. We've possibly got a collapse happening in the Middle East. Very, very uncertain what's going to happen. Very, very worrying stuff. And what that's doing, I think one of the reasons why some people are afraid of that, and with reason, because if not solved, these crises are going to make life extremely unpleasant for an extremely large proportion of the world's population. And what's also worrying is that some of the responses to that seem to be becoming increasingly coercive. How have we got to a situation where we're hassling innocent teenagers because they're the wrong religion? And even the Liberal Democrats are advocating control orders. I mean, okay, I think we've renamed them, haven't we? But it's control orders. Detention without trial from the Liberal Democrats. What's going on? Not surprising. that we're actually beginning to feel uneasy about these changes. And I've begun to notice this, people saying, well, I'm concerned about climate change. I think it's a really, really important threat. It's also an opportunity for those who like change and innovation and change. But it's an area I spend quite a lot of my time thinking about and working on. And for the many of us in that area, we'd like to see it taking us towards a more humane future. And you find yourself thinking, oh my God, is the only way of solving this authoritarian solutions, as advocated by the right, who's also, of course, trying to pretend that climate change isn't happening. I don't like that idea. I gather in the US, in particular, I was talking with a friend of mine who lives out there just the other day. There's this really big debate about, is the only way to make change the Chinese model? Apparently, it used to be thought in the US, very deeply embedded belief that democracy and capitalism went hand in glove, and you couldn't have one without the other. And apparently now they're looking across at China, and they're saying, well, actually, capitalism seems to be working perfectly well, making loads of people loads of money, in something which is clearly not a democratic situation. So maybe we're wrong about that capitalism and democracy go hand in glove. Maybe actually capitalism works really quite well with authoritarian control. And I fear in the US politics, if you said, well, we can have either democracy or capitalism, which do you want to have? They'll go capitalism. So when you start looking at saying, well, do we actually does rapid change and solving this problem need centralized control? I think the classic example is they look at the Three Gorges Dam. And this is a rather murky picture of the Three Gorges Dam. They're all apparently fairly murky pictures of the Three Gorges Dam because the air pollution's so bad there. Three Gorges Dam. This is this big hydropower station in China. When you look at the statistics, it is quite amazing. It displaced 1.3 million people in building it. It is 400 miles long, the flooding. I thought, how far is 400 miles? China's a big place. It's from here, it's from London to Fort William in Scotland. It's like flooding from here to Fort William. How long would that take if we were going to do that in the UK? It took them 16 years from the point at which the Central Council actually decided that they were going to do it. It then took them 16 years, and it's now producing power. So I think it's still not completely full. Do we need authoritarian control? What would the creative alternative be? And how would it work? Is there hope? Well, I should perhaps say, before I share a few sort of principles about how I think a sort of creative view might help, I should just say that a lot of people seem to think that creativity is about wacky brainstorming tools and thinking out of the box, blue sky thinking and electric light bulbs flashing on. I'd ban the electric light bulb. The clip art light bulb is one of my pet hates. Very, very little of my work is actually involved in wacky brainstorming tools and stuff like that. It's usually about much deeper issues to do with purpose, about partnership, about freedom. And so I'm going to share a few of those ideas. So I think if you were going to say, well, actually, if we we're going to need rapid, urgent change. We want to sort of put aside the idea of just doing it the authoritarian way and just saying, just do it. And we're going to look at creativity. What tools do we have? Well, the first principle I would say is we need to focus on the clarity of purpose. And I find and every innovator, artist, entrepreneur, even revolutionary, tends to start by getting very clear about their purpose. Even if you're saying, well, so for example, in my innovations, it was, I want to develop a tool-free blade-changing device for a jigsaw. An artist might say, I want to look at the essence of water flowing under a bridge, or the utopia of travel. even if I don't know, as the example this morning from Wising Arts, whether that was going to come out as a moving house, I'm sure the artists knew they were interested in exploring the idea of utopian travel. In Egypt, it's an amazing movement we've just seen in the last few weeks. They had a very clear purpose. Mubarak out. I don't think it's been so clear as what the purpose is after that, and we may see it becoming less effective. So, clarity of purpose. Every innovator, artist, etc. knows we've got to know what we're trying to achieve if we're going to have a hope of getting there, because we're not following a road, we just know we want to be over there. In business, I find it bizarre that actually this isn't obvious. So Peter Davis, former chief exec of Sainsbury's, said to his people, this was about 2001, be innovative or you are fired. Everybody ran around like headless chickens. They wanted to be innovative. They knew the company needed it. They desperately didn't want to be fired, but they were absolutely unclear about what sort of behavior would count as being innovative, but wouldn't count in the categories of behavior that would also get them fired, because clearly some things would still get them fired. 4 years later, Sainsbury's had dropped down the league table and Sir Peter got fired. Sorry, I'm not sure if he got fired. He moved on to pastures new. In the NHS, the culture develops, I think, in a big, complicated organisation, and I've got a massive, massive time for the NHS. And of course, it's over 1 million people. It's one of the most complex, wonderful organisations out there. But in any big organisation, many people are working away, and they're multiple levels away from the ultimate output of the organisation. And so, quite understandably, you lose track of what the end purpose is. You just do your job. So a culture develops in many big corporates of, here's your target, just do it. Don't ask questions. That's really bad. It makes the organisation function. It's completely not conducive to creativity or even to effective operation. So, for example, I rather like the story of one hospital that met the trolley wait target. This is in A&E. How long you have to wait. You wait on a trolley before you get put in a bed. And it's 4 hours. And you may notice that when you've been there 3 hours, 59 minutes, you immediately get put into a bed. Well, one hospital had a very clever idea. How do we meet the trolley wait target? When we've also got 192 other targets. A chief exec of an NHS hospital told me that they typically have 192 targets to meet, all of equal priority. How do you meet your trolley wait target in 4 hours? They had a clever idea. They took the wheels off the trolleys and they called them beds. So the problem with setting this sort of mindless, here's your target, just do it, people will use their creativity because people are naturally creative, but it may not be the outcome that you hoped. It may not even be a very effective outcome. I don't think the patients were much more comfortable on a trolley that didn't have wheels. So what happens if you start taking an organisation, you say, well, actually, let's get clear about the purpose. So I do a bit of work with the NHS. And there's a great group in Papworth, based in Papworth, called the Nhs Innovation Hub, which is like east. And they're responsible for helping innovators within the NHS in the east of England get their ideas exploited for the benefit of the NHS. Whether it's a surgeon with an idea for a better surgical widget, or a nurse with an idea for a better way of treating patients. And I did some work with them. When I was first asked to come in, the team, who were all, able, very skilled people, were feeling quite down because they saw they had these impossible targets to meet, and they just felt really ground down by it. There was just no energy there, though they were very able people. And we did various things together, but I think the key thing I did with them was I helped them connect with a sense of purpose that made sense. And in the NHS, much of the culture is about patient benefit. That's actually what gets people going. And these people, this team, was meant to work on the sort of interface between patient benefit and commercial. And that's nasty money stuff. And they felt very uncomfortable with that. But when I actually helped them work out how to connect their own skills with creating patient benefit, and that was what it was fundamentally for. And I actually gave them permission, I didn't have authority to, but I just did, to put aside their targets and focus on how to create patient benefit using their skills. It was like turning the taps on. It was just really exciting. They got really fired up. They really understood how to apply their skills for what they were meant to do. And as I promised them it would, I'm glad I was right, they all actually also met all their targets because they were now really buzzing. They met their targets to such an extent that at the end of the financial year, the central authority phoned up a thing called the NHS Institute for Innovation and Improvement. Or maybe it was. One loses track of these reorganisations that happen. And the East of England has been a kind of small hub. It was, a very middle-sized one. And suddenly it was a top-performing hub of all the 16 around the country. And the Institute rang up and said, what happened? How did you go from being nothing to being right at the top? Very kindly, one of the things they said about what had happened was we got Anne in. But actually, the main thing was that actually it turned on their taps. Once they knew what they were for, what their purpose was, they really buzzed. And they've remained so ever since. And okay, that's not the whole of the NHS, it's just a personal story. But connecting with the clarity, with the purpose, is so important, and it's forgotten in most big companies. Rule number 2, if you want to actually make change happen in a creative way, is develop the structures that will allow for both partnership and freedom. And these things don't just happen. If you ignore it, you have anarchy. So I've been quite interested in climate change. This is the WAVE demo that happened before the Copenhagen UN talks in London, when we got 50,000 people out on the street of London, organised by a fairly little-known organisation called the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. This was a coalition that had 5 members back in 2004 and well over 100 by the time of this demo. And those members were all big NGOs and little ones concerned about climate change, with altogether about 11 million members. And I was on the board of the coalition, and what we were trying to do was to develop ways for the NGOs to work together on climate change to create a public mandate for political action, which was something they all cared about. But of course, they were all also competitors. Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth are ardent competitors for members, for funding, for profile, for everything else. We tried all sorts of ways of getting them to collaborate, developing our own brand, a thing called iCount, which you probably haven't heard of. Corporates loved it, but the NGOs only promoted it really reluctantly because it was sort of a competitor. The thing that worked really well was when we just started setting up events, the structure that allowed people to come along and say, we're RSPB, come along, bring your supporters with us. We're Cambridge Carbon Footprint, come and support us. And that really worked. And it was much less work for our hard-pressed director to actually cat-herd and make happen. The third area I just want to highlight is the structures that let you democratize creativity. When mobile phones, Wikipedia, there are so many examples where, let's start by looking at Wikipedia. It's an incredibly reliable, successful encyclopedia. There are some million contributors. There are 6 staff at Wikipedia. They've set up the structure that enables it to happen and be satisfying, and to edit Wikipedia documents, articles. Mobile phones. We talked earlier about the rise of technology. I must say I kind of disagree with the figures we saw at the beginnings, talking about how rapidly change is sweeping through. It's a very narrow sort of change, this techie change of the rise of TV, iPhones, all the rest of it. Deeper change takes a longer time, just as it always has. But texting, incredibly important. It was not initially considered as a viable means of communication. The engineers included it because A, they had a bit of spare space in the chip, and B, they thought it might be useful for texting. So for testing their chips to be able to send out a message. Marketing thought it was going to be useful for telling you that you had a message. That's all it was for. It was stroppy teenagers that couldn't spell that thought it was fun and cheap to use this system for sending messages. iPhone apps. 3 years after the iPhone launched, there were 300,000 apps developed by some by companies, some by crazed hobbyists, some by software geeks. Even a firm like Apple could never have made something like iPhone apps, made that number. So, in conclusion, really what I would say is if you actually want an alternative to the authoritarian change, try creative change. You want to make it purposeful, you want to make it involving, you want to make it fun, and then quite probably it will actually be both far more effective and far faster than authoritarian change. And even if it doesn't work, it'll be a lot more fun. Thank you.